This episode of the Beef Market Update is brought to you by Brett Young. You treat them like family, feed them like family. Talk to your retailer about Brett Young's forage and corn options for a happy, healthy herd.
Okay, let's talk to Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, for this week's Beef Market Update. And great to chat with you.
It is good to be with you today, Sean.
Yeah, lots happening right now in the cattle markets. Last week, some all-time highs. This week, a little bit weaker on the futures front. But I want to get to the avian influenza and the impact it has had on a few dairy animals. It's had some impact on the markets this week.
Well, like we always say, Sean, anytime markets are dealing with a surprise or uncertainty, this is the reaction. So here we go. The market was already dealing with a bit of a bearish report on feed report from last Friday. We'll talk about that in a second. But then also earlier this week, this confirmation from USDA of some of these older dairy cows in Kansas and Texas that had contracted avian influenza. And just so listeners know, it's spread by wild birds, as you've likely heard. It acts like a flu and tends to affect what they've seen and said so far, older dairy cows. So obviously no impact on milk or meat quality, no threat to human health, but this has created a surprise in the markets. It does reduce milk production 10 to 20% in these affected cows, and then they tend to recover about 10 to 14 days later. So that's what USDA has told us this week. Markets, especially the futures markets, have responded. The managed money funds have liquidated their positions as they tend to do with these unknowns. And that has put some pressure. So let's start with the cash, Sean. We did see just here this morning, we've seen some southern trade in Texas and Kansas, two lower than last week at 186. The northern trade kind of ranging, just light trade between 183 and 188. 298 dressed, which is about $4 lower than last week. And again, as you mentioned at the onset, this is after posting an all-time high last week for fat cattle in the U.S. The 5-area average was 189.56. So that's kind of where we sit. And I guess let's just carry on. The market was also, like I said a minute ago, dealing with a bearish February placement number from last Friday's cattle on feed report. So that didn't help matters either. We kind of were on our heels in terms of market action when the avian influenza news came out. So what did that report say last Friday? Well, February placements were up 10%. But I'm going to hedge my bet a little bit. And when I add January, because January was so off with the winter weather in January, and February was up, when you put the two together, year-to-date placements in the 2 months are up 1%. That was just like Canada for the Western Canadian on-feed report. February, big placements, but when you added it with January, it was actually down 2%. So I think sometimes when you have these crazy up and down months, it's wise to look at a little broader picture. And then I guess, Sean, we're heading into a short week. Well, we're in a short week heading into a holiday weekend. So we have to talk a little bit about demand. And I think no surprise probably to anybody that's been in the grocery store lately, but on the demand side, pork was the winner for this Easter break for sure. So that choice cutout that I always talk about every week, it's down $5 this week compared to the end of last week. It closed at 308.5. And again, pork the winner. It certainly is trading at a big discount to beef, and so that's not a surprise in my opinion. So I guess some things we'll be watching for as we go forward, Sean, and see what happens from there.
I was kind of, and not to say it's the same, it's not the same thing, but I was reminded this week during the avian influenza release that came out from USDA, and I believe it was National Milk Producers Federation, mentioned don't export markets, you don't need to close borders. And it kind of triggered a memory for me back to, was it 03, BSE, borders closed? I sort of had this mental memory trigger to oh my God. It's just so funny how events can remind you of other situations.
You must be Canadian.
Is that what that means? Okay. Hey, as we look ahead to the fall here, and which is still some time away because we haven't even really engaged in spring yet. But boy, I'll tell you, this feeder market, it's definitely giving signals to ranchers that pricing is looking pretty good here for 24. Is that a fair statement, or what are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. So we're on the supply piece, right? So some of the demand question marks I think are valid, but on the supply piece, we know what we've got, and that's a considerably smaller beef supply in both the U.S. and Canada here in 24. So that's what's been pushing prices higher. It's what will continue to keep the market solid. Now, does the market go straight up like kind of the trend we saw in 23? Well, no, I don't think so, because last year we saw the markets moving to this new trading range. Now we're here. And so I think as we go through 24, one of the things I'll be watching for is more of what are the seasonal patterns. So for fed cattle, that's spring high, summer low. I'm still kind of leaning that direction. In terms of feeder cattle, typically we see the market continue to grind higher as we go through the spring and into the summer and make their highs in August or September. Is that in the cards? I still think that's in the cards for sure. So those are the things that we'll be watching as we go forward. But demand is, I think, one of our biggest question marks. It decides how far can we go? Where do the highs get placed? Was last week's high the high for this year? Those kinds of questions I think will come out more as we see how demand fares in the second quarter.
And if we get, okay, I want to get too far ahead of myself here, but if we do get moisture, we've got big wet snow right now, which is definitely making people feel better about themselves and their grass. Is this the year that maybe people are like, okay, yeah, heifer retention?
Well, when you look at some of the markets that are trading right now with some of these replacement type heifers, I mean, the prices are phenomenal. So I already think, for maybe not for everyone, but certainly for some producers out there, that is what's in the cards and driving some of the strength that's going on right now. So, and again, math is math in terms of what these calves are going to trade for or what they're expected to trade for vis-a-vis what the cow is worth, so those things are driving this market higher. And I think that will continue to provide strong support as we go through the year.
Yeah, like to use this, it is, it was opening day this week, and to use a sports reference, it's teams are going to pay in free agency is similar to how feed yards are going to have to pay for feeder animals. They're going to have to buck up. Hey, so and as we look at the current pricing environment, and we kind of even talked a little bit about throughout the rest of 24, where we are right now. Talk about the seasonality trends and what typically happens at this time and in the near term going forward.
Okay, no, that's great to pull out because it is that time of the year where usually fed cattle prices make their spring high, late March, early April. So that's exactly where we are. So with this week's action and the market down this week, do we look back and say last week was the high and the markets are going to kind of trend towards a summer low from here? Or do we still have some time and the market can recover and shake off this last week's negative news and claw back? So we'll be looking for that one. And then the other seasonal timing piece that I think is important to keep watching is that cutout, that wholesale price. So typically it makes its high in the second quarter. And so we'll be looking for that cutout value, that choice cutout value to keep marching higher. I know it was off $5 this week, but can it also shake off this news and transition higher as we head into grilling season? So those are the kind of things we're going to still be watching from signals in terms of demand, and then also on the placements figure. And I talked about this earlier in terms of, do the imports rack up like they did a couple of years ago, or are we looking at smaller imports and then overall smaller supplies for Canadian cattle feeders? So those are two big pieces, but they're hugely supportive to what's going on with the strong feeder market and these tighter supplies.
When you talk about that potentially rising cutout value, where is packer profitability right now?
Well, I think again at this time of year they're in the red, but seasonality of packer margins as they head into the second quarter and they sell that beef for higher money and they buy cattle at lower money. That's when their margins typically improve. So again, going from the red into the black, going from Q1 red to Q2 black would be a typical seasonal trend for packer margins, and that's also what we're expecting at this point in time.
The other encouraging thing that I saw this week, and it wasn't just specific to beef, it's a lot of different agricultural commodities, but Canadian Trade Minister Ng in Vietnam this week. That's an important market for beef.
Vietnam really, Sean, it's still a small market compared to, U.S. and Mexico and Japan and South Korea, but it's coming right on the heels of those. And so anytime you can get some diversity across markets, especially into those Asian and growing Asian markets, it's only good news for a market that's open for Canadian beef and especially for its closeness to some of the other Asian markets. So that's anytime those deals are being worked on is only good news for Canadian beef producers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and have yourself a great Easter weekend. All the best to you, and we'll chat with you again in a couple weeks, okay?
Okay, thanks so much, Sean.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the Beef Market Update, brought to you by Brett Young. Check out their silage and grazing corn, stock blends, or custom build your own mix for a happy, healthy herd. Talk to your retailer today.